You know that moment when you're at a restaurant and you've ordered your meal and the waiter has brought the bread and you're settling in for what you assume will be a normal dining experience. And then suddenly, some guy at the next table who isn't even eating there starts yelling about how terrible your food choice is, and somehow, inexplicably, the entire restaurant staff decides to listen to this random person and your meal gets cancelled. And then, just to make it even more surreal, you discover that this random person doesn't even have a reservation, has never worked at a restaurant, and spent most of his criticism loudly insisting that your chicken parmesan was actually made of live bees, which anyone with functioning eyeballs could see was completely false. Well, congratulations. You've just experienced what it's like to be an American citizen watching Elon Musk single-handedly derail government funding negotiations from his phone. Because that's exactly what happened in December when Congress was trying to pass what's called a continuing resolution. Basically a fancy term for let's keep the lights on for a few more months while we figure out the actual budget. It's like agreeing to keep paying rent while you argue about whether to renovate the kitchen. Except in this case, the person arguing about the kitchen doesn't even live in the house and owns 17 other houses, including one on Mars. Now, according to official records, this particular funding bill would have kept the government running through March 14th, provided about $100 billion in disaster relief for communities hit by hurricanes and other natural disasters, and allocated $30 billion in aid to farmers. It was, by most accounts, a fairly standard bipartisan agreement, the kind of deal that usually passes without much fanfare because nobody really wants to explain to their constituents why the government is closed over Christmas. But then Elon Musk woke up on Wednesday morning and decided to have what experts might call a normal one. Over the course of roughly 12 hours, he posted more than 100 tweets about this funding bill. Let me repeat that, 100 tweets. That's approximately one tweet every 7 minutes for 12 straight hours. Which means either Elon Musk has developed the ability to tweet while sleeping, or he spent an entire day doing nothing but refreshing X and typing angry thoughts about congressional spending. And what exactly was he so upset about? Well, according to his posts, pretty much everything. He called the bill criminal because it was 1,500 pages long. He claimed it funded bioweapon labs when it actually provided money for biocontainment research facilities to help prepare for things like emerging infectious diseases. He shared false information claiming the bill allocated billions for a new NFL stadium in Washington, D.C., when it actually specifically prohibited using federal funds for stadium purposes. The man who owns a social media platform used that platform to spread demonstrably false information about government spending, which is like being the fire chief and responding to every emergency by lighting additional fires. But here's where it gets truly absurd. Because Musk's Twitter tantrum wasn't just ignored as the ramblings of a billionaire having a bad day. Instead, according to Republican House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, the bill was declared dead by Wednesday evening. A bipartisan agreement that had been negotiated by actual elected officials, people who, whatever their flaws, had at least won elections and taken oaths to serve the American people, was killed by someone whose only qualification for weighing in on federal spending is that he's really, really rich. Think about that for a moment. We live in a democracy where the richest man in the world can wake up, spend a day posting on social media, and effectively shut down the United States government. It's like if Jeff Bezos could cancel Christmas by leaving enough bad Yelp reviews about Santa Claus. And the truly remarkable part is that this wasn't even done through any official channels. Musk holds no elected office. He has no formal role in government until Trump takes office in January. He was, at the time, essentially a very wealthy Twitter user with opinions about spending bills. And yet his influence was so significant that betting markets tracking the likelihood of a government shutdown saw the odds jump from 12% to 40% over the course of that single day. Think about that. Financial markets that exist solely to predict political outcomes saw a billionaire's tweet storm and thought, well, I guess the federal government might close now. It's like if your local McDonald's started closing every time Gordon Ramsay posted a negative review about the food industry in general. But wait, because it gets worse. Because about 13 hours after Musk's initial opposition to the bill, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance released their own statement condemning the legislation. Now, maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe Trump was always planning to oppose this bill and just happened to announce it exactly when Musk's Twitter campaign was reaching peak intensity. Or maybe, and I'm just speculating here, the president-elect of the United States was taking his cues from social media posts like the rest of us do when we're trying to figure out what happened on a TV show we missed. In their statement, Trump and Vance didn't just oppose the spending bill, they also demanded something called a debt ceiling increase, writing, and this is a real quote, "Increasing the debt ceiling is not great, but we'd rather do it on Biden's watch." Which is basically admitting that they want to stick the current president with responsibility for spending money that the next administration plans to spend anyway. It's like borrowing your friend's car, running up the gas bill, and then insisting they pay for it because technically the meter was running on their day. So House Speaker Mike Johnson, faced with opposition from both the world's richest man and the incoming president, did what any reasonable person would do. He completely rewrote the bill. The new version was slimmed down to 116 pages and included Trump's demand for the debt ceiling suspension. Trump celebrated this revised bill on his Truth Social platform, posting "Success in Washington." Because nothing says successful governance like having to rewrite legislation because someone tweeted about it really, really hard. But here's the beautiful irony. Even this Trump-approved, Musk-influenced version of the bill failed spectacularly. It was voted down by nearly all Democrats and about 36 Republicans. Turns out that when you gut a bipartisan compromise to appease a billionaire's Twitter tantrum, you tend to lose the bipartisan support that made it viable in the first place. Who could have possibly predicted that? Now, this whole saga would be merely embarrassing if it were just about political theatre, but the stakes here are actually quite serious. A government shutdown doesn't just mean politicians stop getting paychecks, though that would be fine with me. It means that Transportation Security Administration workers, Border Patrol agents, air traffic controllers, and thousands of other federal employees either get furloughed or have to work without pay during the holiday season. And let's be clear about what that actually means. When we say TSA workers would work without pay, we're talking about the people who show up at airports at 4 a.m. to make sure your plane doesn't get blown up by someone with explosive toothpaste. These aren't abstract government bureaucrats sitting in Washington offices. They're people who have rent to pay and kids to feed, and they'd be expected to keep doing their jobs even while their paychecks get held hostage by a billionaire's Twitter tantrum. According to government contingency plans, a shutdown could have disrupted everything from food safety inspections to disaster relief efforts to nutrition assistance programs. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, might have continued for about a month, but other programs like WIC could have run out of funding within days. So when Elon Musk spent his Wednesday tweeting about government efficiency, he was potentially putting at risk the food assistance that millions of American families rely on to feed their children. And this gets to something deeper and more troubling about this entire episode, because Musk's opposition to the funding bill wasn't just based on philosophical disagreements about government spending. According to reporting from multiple news organizations, many of his complaints were based on outright misinformation. He claimed the bill would fund censorship operations when it actually provided money to combat foreign propaganda. He suggested it would waste taxpayer dollars on frivolous projects when much of the spending was for disaster relief and agricultural aid. In other words, a man who owns one of the world's largest information platforms used that platform to spread false information about government policy, and that false information nearly led to a government shutdown. It's like if the person who owned the dictionary started putting fake definitions in it and then acted surprised when people started using words incorrectly. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of this whole fiasco was how quickly it demonstrated the new power dynamics that will define American politics going forward. Because while Musk was tweeting up a storm about government waste, it's worth remembering that his companies have received billions of dollars in government contracts and subsidies. Tesla has benefited from electric vehicle tax credits. SpaceX has massive contracts with NASA and the Defense Department. And according to a New York Times analysis, his 4 companies combined account for at least $15.4 billion in government contracts, with all 4 currently under federal investigation for various reasons. So we have a situation where someone whose businesses are deeply intertwined with federal spending was able to influence federal spending decisions through social media posts. If Musk were an actual government employee, he would be prohibited by federal ethics laws from participating in official matters where he has a financial interest. But because he's technically just a very rich Twitter user, apparently those rules don't apply. And yet somehow, the man whose businesses have received more government funding than most small countries was positioned as the voice of fiscal responsibility. It's like if the kid who always asked to borrow lunch money suddenly started a campaign about the dangers of lending money to people. The sheer audacity of it is almost admirable in a deeply concerning way. And then there's the question of precedent. Because if a billionaire's social media tantrum can derail government funding negotiations, what else can it accomplish? Can Musk tweet his way to changes in environmental regulations that affect his businesses? Can he influence tax policy by posting enough times about it? At what point does government by Twitter stop being a joke and start being an accurate description of how American democracy actually works? The answer, apparently, is right now. Because even though Congress eventually passed a third version of the funding bill and avoided a shutdown, the message was crystal clear. If you're rich enough and loud enough on social media, you can effectively veto the work of elected officials. It's like democracy, but with more typos and character limits. Now, supporters of this arrangement might argue that Musk was just exercising his First Amendment rights and that citizens should be able to criticize government spending. And they're absolutely right about that. The problem isn't that Musk expressed his opinions. The problem is that those opinions carried more weight than the actual democratic process. When a single unelected person can torpedo bipartisan legislation through social media posts, we're not talking about free speech anymore. We're talking about oligarchy. And the fact that much of Musk's criticism was based on false information makes it even worse, because it means our government can be held hostage by lies as long as those lies are popular enough and come from someone rich enough to amplify them. Think about the mechanics of what happened here. Congressional leaders from both parties spent weeks negotiating this funding bill. They held hearings, consulted with experts, balanced competing priorities, and reached a compromise that both Democrats and Republicans could support. It was, by all accounts, the kind of messy, imperfect, but ultimately functional governance that democracy is supposed to produce. And then one person with a Twitter account and a lot of followers decided he didn't like it, so he spent a day posting about it, and the entire thing fell apart. It's like if someone could cancel your wedding by leaving enough negative comments on the venue's Yelp page. The scale of individual power versus institutional authority is completely out of whack. But here's what I find most disturbing about this whole episode: how quickly everyone just accepted it as normal. Republican lawmakers didn't push back against Musk's intervention. They didn't say, "Thanks for your input, but we're the ones who were elected to make these decisions." Instead, they fell in line behind his social media campaign as if it were official party policy. Democratic lawmakers mostly just complained about it, but didn't really challenge the underlying premise that a billionaire's tweets should carry this much weight. And the media largely covered it as a political story rather than what it actually was: a fundamental breakdown in democratic norms. Because that's what this represents. For the first time in American history, an unelected billionaire successfully used social media to override the legislative process. Not through lobbying, not through campaign contributions, not through any of the traditional ways that wealthy people influence politics, but through the sheer force of online engagement. It's like if democracy were a video game and someone just figured out a cheat code that lets them skip all the levels. And the most maddening part is that it worked. Not only did Musk successfully kill the original funding bill, he did it while spreading false information about what the bill actually contained. It's like if someone could get your favorite restaurant shut down by loudly insisting that they serve poisonous food, even though they actually just serve normal food that happens to be more expensive than some people would like. Now, Congress did eventually pass a funding bill and avoid a shutdown, but it was a different bill, crafted under the influence of Musk's intervention, and it took multiple attempts and last-minute negotiations to get it done. The final version was passed so close to the deadline that technically the government did shut down for about 38 minutes, though no one really noticed because it was in the middle of the night. But the precedent has been set. We now know that American governance can be disrupted by anyone with enough money, enough followers, and enough willingness to post false information on social media. It's like we've discovered that our entire political system has a delete button, and we've given the password to someone whose main qualification is that he builds rockets and makes memes. And this is just the beginning, because Musk is supposed to co-chair something called the Department of Government Efficiency when Trump takes office in January. It's not actually a department. It's more like an advisory committee with a catchy acronym, but it's supposed to recommend ways to cut government spending and reduce the federal workforce. So the man who just demonstrated that he can derail government funding through social media posts is about to be given an official role in determining what parts of the government should be cut. It's like putting someone in charge of writing the fire safety manual after they've proven they can burn down buildings just by complaining about them loudly enough. At this point, you might be wondering what any of this has to do with you. And honestly, that's probably the right question to be asking. Because while politicians and billionaires play these games with government funding, real people are affected by the outcomes. federal employees who don't know if they'll get paid during the holidays, farmers waiting for agricultural aid, communities still rebuilding from natural disasters who need federal assistance, small businesses that rely on government contracts. All of these people were potentially affected by one man's decision to spend a day posting angry tweets about a spending bill he clearly hadn't read carefully. And that's the real cost of this kind of governance by social media. It's not just that it's undemocratic, though it definitely is. It's not just that it's based on misinformation, though it clearly was. It's that it treats the basic functions of government like a game, where the rules can be changed by whoever is willing to post the most aggressively. The federal budget isn't a Twitter poll. Government funding isn't a crowdsourcing project. These are serious decisions that affect millions of people's lives, and they should be made through serious processes by people who are accountable to the voters, not by billionaires with smartphones and too much time on their hands. So what do we do about this? Well, the first step is probably acknowledging that this happened and that it represents a genuinely new and troubling development in American politics. We can't just shrug and say that's just how things work now, when a single person can derail the legislative process through social media manipulation. The second step is demanding better from our elected officials, because while Musk may have started this particular fire, it was Republican lawmakers who decided to let it burn down the bipartisan agreement they had negotiated. They had a choice between honoring their commitments to their colleagues and their constituents or following the lead of a billionaire's Twitter tantrum. And they chose the Twitter tantrum. That's not leadership. That's not governance. That's just weak people being pushed around by someone with more money and a bigger megaphone. And we should expect better from the people we elect to represent us. The next time your representative tries to justify their vote by saying, well, a billionaire posted about it on social media, maybe it's time to start looking for a new representative. Third, we need to start treating social media influence operations like what they actually are: attempts to manipulate democratic processes. When someone with millions of followers spreads false information to achieve political outcomes, that's not just expressing an opinion, that's using information warfare tactics against your own government. Finally, we need to have a serious conversation about the role of social media platforms in democratic decision-making. Because when the owner of a major platform can use that platform to spread false information and influence government policy, we're not just talking about free speech anymore. We're talking about a fundamental power imbalance that threatens the basic functioning of democratic institutions. I'm not saying we should regulate social media, though maybe we should, but I am saying we need to stop pretending that this is normal or acceptable. When a tweet can shut down the government, we've crossed a line from democracy into something else entirely. And whatever that something else is, it's not working for most of us. Because at the end of the day, this isn't really about government spending or debt ceilings or even Elon Musk specifically. It's about whether American democracy is going to be run by the people we elect to run it or by whoever happens to be rich enough and loud enough to dominate the conversation at any given moment. And if it's the latter, then we might as well stop calling it democracy and start calling it what it actually is: oligarchy with Wi-Fi. Which honestly sounds like a pretty terrible way to run a country, but at least the memes would probably be decent. So the next time someone tells you that social media is just a platform for sharing opinions, remember that one man's opinions about a spending bill he clearly misunderstood nearly shut down the United States government during Christmas week. And ask yourself whether that's the kind of democracy you want to live in. Because I've got to tell you, the customer service at this particular democracy seems to be getting worse every year. And unlike most bad businesses, we can't really take our money and go somewhere else. This is the democracy we've got. And if we want it to work, we're going to have to fix it ourselves. Starting with making sure that the people who actually get elected to run the government are the ones who get to make the decisions about how it's run. Because as revolutionary as that concept might sound in 2024, it used to be what we called the basic foundation of American politics. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to go back to that.